When people hear the name Russell Crowe, they think of intensity, of gladiator battle cries, and Oscar-winning drama. But behind the scenes, the man who once roared through the Colosseum has spent the last 2 decades navigating a far more complex role: fatherhood. This is the story of what happened to his 2 sons, beginning with the first, Charles Spencer Crowe. Born in Sydney just days before Christmas 2003, Charles arrived not long after Russell married Australian singer and actress Danielle Spencer. It was a moment that promised new beginnings for a man, then at the height of global fame. He had already conquered Hollywood. Now he was stepping into uncharted emotional territory. Charles's early years were shadowed not by the red carpet, but by a private family life crafted deliberately away from the spotlight. Despite his father's high-profile career, Charles was raised with a surprising degree of normalcy. While tabloids followed Crowe from film set to award show, Charles was back home in Australia, climbing trees and kicking soccer balls in the yard. But being the son of one of the world's most recognizable faces meant brushes with celebrity life were inevitable and at times irresistible. When he was just 3 years old, Charles crashed a press junket alongside his father, snatching a microphone and announcing, without hesitation, that he had a joke to tell. The room full of reporters didn't know what hit them. That moment, funny, spontaneous, charming, was pure Charles. Even then, it was clear he had inherited more than his father's last name. As Charles grew, Russell's approach to parenting sharpened with intention. He didn't want to raise a child seduced by fame or softened by privilege. He wanted a thinker, a challenger, someone who could carve his own path. Despite Charles' natural charisma and interest in performance, Russell discouraged any illusions about the acting world. He spoke candidly at home about the industry's brutal nature, its rejection, its scrutiny, its loneliness. Acting wasn't just red carpets and applause, he reminded his son. It was also vulnerability and risk. Charles, for his part, seemed happy to explore other avenues. His early years were dotted with interests that came and went: music, history, even paleontology. At one point, he and his younger brother were so obsessed with dinosaurs that Crowe went out and bought an actual fossilized dinosaur skull for their playroom, an item he had purchased from Leonardo DiCaprio. It was absurd, over the top, and deeply fatherly for a kid growing up between the worlds of celebrity and suburbia. The gesture wasn't about extravagance. It was about being seen, being known, being cared for by a dad who couldn't always be home, but still found ways to say, "I know what you love. I'm listening." The next chapter of Charles' life unfolded more quietly. When Russell and Danielle separated in 2012, custody and family structure were immediately reshaped. Charles remained with his mother in Sydney, and while the parents maintained a respectful co-parenting dynamic, the emotional recalibration was palpable. Russell continued to spend significant time with both sons, often taking them on summer holidays and public outings, but the family was no longer under one roof. Still, for Charles, adolescence didn't seem marked by rebellion or resentment. If anything, it was marked by intentional distance from his father's legacy. By his early teens, Charles had made it clear that he had no interest in inheriting Russell's fame. At one point, he reportedly told his dad, bluntly, that no matter what roles he took or how many awards he won, "You'll never be cool because you're my dad." It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. Charles didn't want to be his father, he wanted to be himself. And so, while other celebrity children chased clout or reality deals, Charles stayed grounded. He attended a regular school in Sydney, played sports, and kept his online presence almost non-existent. He never chased the camera. In fact, the only time the public caught a real glimpse of him as a teen was in 2021, when his mother posted a rare photo celebrating his high school graduation, standing tall, long-haired, with the unmistakable profile of his father and the calm confidence of a young man who knew exactly who he was and who he wasn't. There's something poignant about watching a celebrity child choose quiet. In a world where second-generation fame is increasingly common and often commodified, Charles' path has been one of restraint and introspection. There are no acting credits, no production internships, no interviews about what it was like growing up with Russell Crowe. His story so far has been one of boundaries, balance, and silent strength. And that, perhaps, is the greatest performance of all. As adulthood begins, the question of what Charles will become remains unanswered. But if his upbringing is any clue, he will become someone who values character over celebrity, depth over drama, and maybe, just maybe, someone who will make the world listen, not because of who his father was, but because of who he quietly chose to be. If Charles was the quiet observer carving a life just outside his father's spotlight, then Tennyson Crowe was the more elusive spark, curious, witty, and always two steps away from being fully seen. Born in July 2006, 3 years after his older brother, Tennyson entered a household already recalibrating under the weight of fame and parental separation. But where Charles gravitated toward anonymity, Tennyson grew up with a bit more playfulness about the whole thing. He had the same dark eyes, the same stubbornness, but a different pulse entirely, one that thrived in conversation, honesty, and the occasional wisecrack that caught adults off guard. Russell Crowe never shied away from saying fatherhood was the best thing that had ever happened to him, but even he would admit that parenting Tennyson came with a new kind of challenge. One not rooted in discipline, but in decoding a personality too sharp to be underestimated. From early on, Tennyson seemed to view the world through a comedic lens. When asked during the pandemic why he and Charles had opted to quarantine with their mom in Sydney rather than head to their father's property in the bush, his answer was blunt. Uber Eats. It wasn't meant to be rude, just honest food delivery, beat sheep herding. He was that kind of kid. No pretense, no filter, and in a family as carefully private as the Crowes, that rawness stood out like a spotlight. Yet for all his humor and spark, Tennyson, like Charles, was shaped by a parenting style that emphasized privacy, humility, and restraint. Russell and Danielle were aligned in one core mission: raising grounded boys in an ungrounded world. The brothers didn't grow up giving interviews or attending premieres. Their school photos weren't splashed across magazines, and when it came to birthdays or graduations, social media stayed silent, except for the rare post from Danielle, who preferred to mark these milestones with warmth and brevity. As Tennyson grew older, his relationship with Charles took on quiet importance. The two were close in age but distinct in temperament. Charles was more reserved, inward-thinking, sometimes aloof. Tennyson was quicker to speak, quicker to laugh, and quicker to challenge the world around him. Their dynamic wasn't oppositional, it was complementary. Together, they offered each other balance. One would keep the other grounded. The other would remind him not to take life too seriously. In a family known for stoic performances and intense roles, their bond offered a softer, unspoken script. That bond extended even into their childhood fascinations. At one point, both brothers were swept up in a dinosaur obsession so deep it prompted Russell to do something only a Hollywood dad could do: buy an actual fossilized dinosaur head. The gift wasn't for attention. It was for the playroom, for wonder, for joy. That's how their father expressed love when words fell short, through gestures that said, "I see you." But even amid these grand gestures, Tennyson didn't grow up pampered. He knew exactly who his father was, and just as clearly, what it meant to live outside that mythology. Like his brother, he stayed away from cameras, auditions, or the trappings of a second-generation celebrity life. His humor never turned into stand-up. His honesty never became performance. Instead, he chose something quieter: school, friends, music, maybe sports. The details are sparse, and that's by design. The Crowe children weren't raised for the stage, they were raised for life. By the time Tennyson reached his mid-teens, he had become the embodiment of the modern low-key Gen Z teen. While some celebrity kids were launching fashion brands or viral YouTube channels, Tennyson was still in the background attending school, staying close to home, and offering the occasional insight that made his father chuckle in interviews. Russell spoke of his younger son, With a kind of amused reverence, Tennyson had opinions, and he didn't hold them back. If a movie was boring, he'd say so. If his dad was being dramatic, he'd call it out. He wasn't impressed by fame. And that perhaps was the greatest gift Danielle and Russell could have given him, the freedom to be unimpressed, to belong not to the world of Hollywood, but to himself. There's no acting reel for Tennyson, no public record of auditions or industry credits. What exists instead is a portrait in progress of a young man growing up deliberately outside the current of celebrity culture. He might choose music or art or something far from both, or he might quietly continue his life in Sydney, popping into the occasional family vacation photo and avoiding the rest. The only thing clear is that, like Charles, Tennyson is not rushing to define himself in public terms. He is growing up in the aftermath of someone else's spotlight and doing it on his own terms. Now, with both sons in adulthood or on the cusp of it, Russell Crowe remains a proud but distant figure, not in affection, but in fame. He's still on sets, still promoting films, still bearing the weight of his own legacy. But in interviews, when the topic shifts to his boys, his expression softens. He doesn't speak about their ambitions or potential careers. He talks about their humor, their decency, their honesty, the things that rarely make headlines but define a life. That's the quiet legacy he hopes they carry, not one of awards or acclaim, but of character. And for now, that seems to be exactly what they're building. As Charles and Tennyson continued growing into adulthood, what became most striking wasn't how much they resembled their father, but how carefully they avoided becoming versions of him. Not out of resentment, but perhaps as an act of quiet rebellion against a world that expected them to be something other than themselves. The Crowe boys didn't choose fame. It arrived before they could talk, baked into their last name, sewn into the fabric of their family. But even in a landscape littered with celebrity offspring, seeking spotlights of their own, Charles and Tennyson have made one radical choice: to stay still, not retreat, not hide, just live. Charles, now in his early 20s, remains a figure of curiosity only in passing. He's been spotted occasionally with family, at small public events or in a candid post from his mother, but there's no press junket, no magazine profile, no film debut looming on the horizon. He has a life, but it's one few people know. That's not a failure of ambition, it's a statement. If there's any narrative he's chosen to follow, it's one written in silence. Tennyson, younger but just as self-contained, is stepping into adulthood with the same restraint. No Instagram feed, no TikTok fame, no last-minute cameo in a father's film. Even when his father jokes about him on talk shows or shares a family vacation photo, it's always on Russell's terms. The boys never post themselves. That distance is by design. Both sons seem to understand something that often escapes the children of icons: the difference between being known and being seen. Their lives are richer, fuller, more ordinary than the headlines could capture, and that's exactly how they want it. It's not that Charles and Tennyson are unaware of the power their father's name holds. In fact, it's the opposite. They seem to understand it too well, and instead of cashing in on the Crowe legacy, they've done something much harder. They've kept their identities separate from it. No movie premieres, no talent agents, no Hollywood name drop culture, just two brothers moving forward, each in his own lane. And for Russell Crowe, that choice may be the one that makes him most proud. This is a man who's played gladiators, captains, geniuses, and outlaws, a man who has stood at the center of global film franchises and walked red carpets in every corner of the world. But when asked about fatherhood, his eyes soften. He doesn't list their accomplishments. He doesn't rattle off GPAs or goals. He speaks instead about trust, humor, integrity, that his boys have grown up kind, that they're honest, that they're comfortable saying no. To him, that's a legacy, not a headline, not a box office record, just the quiet inheritance of decency. In the end, Charles and Tennyson may never follow their father onto a film set, and that's okay, because what they're building is different. something steadier, deeper, and built far away from applause. They are the sons of Russell Crowe, but they are not defined by him. They are their own stories, still unfolding slowly, quietly, and on their own terms. If you found this breakdown powerful and want more deep dives into the hidden lives of Hollywood's forgotten children, subscribe to our channel. Your support brings these invisible stories to light. Thanks for listening.